This is Jennifer Gonzalez welcoming you to episode 28 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, I'm going to give you a big, long list of strategies for class discussion. Hello there. I'm so glad you're listening. I have been hearing from people who tell me that they're listening on their commutes and on their walks and when they work out. And so I'm starting to be able to picture some of you and where you are right now. And that's just so great because doing this is a little bit like talking out into space. And so I just wanted to say hello. So I have a ton of really good stuff for you today, but first, two things. Number one, if you have not yet gone over to iTunes to give the show a review, I would be so appreciative of it. The reviews are starting to build up, and that really, really helps to bring other people to the podcast. So if you have not done that yet, please run on over to iTunes and just drop a quick review for the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. Number two, I have an announcement. This summer, I co-wrote a book with Mark Barnes called Hacking Education, 10 Quick Fixes for Every School. In this book, we share creative, innovative solutions that tackle all kinds of problems that teachers and schools have dealt with for years. If you've been a regular listener, you heard me share some of these hacks in episode 22. I talked about teacher quiet zones and pineapple charts and moving meetings to the cloud. Anyway, the book is done really well on Amazon. We've gotten over 60 five-star reviews in just a few months. And so the announcement is that now the audio version of the book is available. It's not read by me or Mark. It's read by a different narrator. But if you are a podcast listener, then you are probably also an audiobook listener. So I thought it would be great for you to know about this. To get it, you would just go to Amazon and look for Hacking Education, 10 Quick Fixes for Every School. And then you'll see there is an audio option. And you can actually get the audio version for free if you sign up for a 30-day free trial with Audible. So go check that out. Okay. Now we've got some discussion strategies to talk about. Before I get started, let me tell you that all of the strategies I'm going to talk about in this episode have links to videos that demonstrate them. And these come from all different places, YouTube and the teaching channel and that sort of thing. So if you want to see any of these in action, then you're going to need to actually go to the website. Just go to cultofpedagogy.com/pod, click episode 28, and that'll take you to the full article that this podcast is based on. And you can click over and watch any of the videos. Okay, when I worked with student teachers on their lesson plans, one of the things I always asked them to revise was the phrase, "we will discuss." They would write in their plans, "Next, we will discuss the video," or "we will discuss the story," or "we will discuss our results." And every time I saw that, I would leave a note. What does this mean exactly? What format will you use? What questions are you going to be asking? How will you ensure that all students participate? Because I was pretty sure that the phrase "we will discuss" actually meant that the teacher would do most of the talking. He would throw out a couple of questions like, "So what did you think about the video?" or "What was the theme of the story?" And a few students would respond, resulting in something that looked like a discussion, but was ultimately just a conversation between the teacher and a handful of extroverted students, which is a classic case of what I call fisheye teaching. Fisheye teaching is, imagine yourself looking through a peephole in a door, and you know how it kind of bends the view so that the person who's right in front looks really big and then everybody else behind them looks really small. And I think teachers have this view sometimes where they believe they're actually engaging with everybody, but they're really only focusing on that those one or two students who are right up in front of them, and they don't even really notice that there's all these other kids in the room who aren't actually participating at all, but the teacher feels as if they're having a conversation with everybody. Okay, so the problem with these lesson plans that my student teachers were writing, it wasn't really their fault because every classroom that they had ever been in probably class discussions basically looked like that. So when they said "we will discuss," they knew what they meant. They meant that the teacher would discuss and some students would talk with them. So they didn't really know any other formats. When I asked them for formats, they didn't necessarily know even what another format would be. I personally only knew of a couple. I knew philosophical chair. I didn't know philosophical chairs. I knew Socratic seminar. I knew of something else that I'm going to call philosophical chairs in here, but I didn't know that was what it was called. So I only knew a couple of things myself. And I started getting letters from some of the readers of my website also asking for more. They would say, oh, I know a couple of them. Do you know of any other discussion strategies? So I decided it was time for me to do some more serious research and put together a collection of discussion strategies. So that is what this episode and the associated blog post are about. I've got 15 different formats for structuring a class discussion. I am going to break them down into 3 parts. The first group is what I would call high prep strategies. These are things that in their traditional sense anyway, they would require a little bit more preparation by the teacher and the students before you can actually have the discussion. Then the next group are the low prep strategies. These are the more sort of like plug and play. You can just, you got 10 extra minutes at the end of the class. You can say, okay, let's do one of these. Or, they can be related to your content area, but you don't necessarily have to do a lot of preparation. Now, with both of these first 2 groups, you can obviously go back and forth. You could take a high prep strategy and do it in a more low prep way. And same with the low prep ones. You could add a little bit more complexity to it or make it based on a reading or something and include more preparation. But generally speaking, they're either high prep or low prep. And then the last group, I'm just calling those ongoing strategies. And with this last batch, they're not a structured discussion in and of themselves. They are things that you can use within other instructional strategies or discussions. That'll make more sense once I actually get to them. But let's get started. First, we're going to talk about the high prep discussion strategies. And the first one is called Gallery Walk. Here's how Gallery Walk works. And I actually called this chat stations in a much, much earlier blog post. I had never heard of Gallery Walk until recently, but when I read it, I thought, oh, that sounds a lot like chat stations, which is just a term I made up because I didn't know what else to call it. But here's how Gallery Walk works. The teacher or the student, somebody places sort of stations around the classroom. These can be discussion questions or they can be tasks that are set around the room, and students in small groups travel from station to station or poster to poster or question to question, and they stop there and they have a discussion based on whatever they're told to do at that spot. Now, the reason it's called Gallery Walk is that in some situations, what teachers will do is actually have groups of students create sort of posters that have some kind of information on them. They'll hang the poster up, and then groups of students will travel from poster to poster having a discussion. And the most formal way of setting this up is to make sure that for every poster, a student who created that poster is in every group. So you sort of mix up the kids so that whenever a group of students travels to a poster, there's someone in that group who created it and can talk about it. And then when they move to the next poster, someone else in their group was part of the group that made that poster. And so there are high prep ways of doing this, or the way that I've done this sometimes is you can almost take like a worksheet really, or just a list of questions. And instead of just throwing them out to the class, what you can do is post them around the room instead and have small groups travel from station to station and have those conversations that way. You build in that extra movement. And because the students are in small groups, there's a little bit more of an intimate feel. There's less risk in terms of speaking up. You can also add a recording sheet that goes with the traveling around so that there's some built-in accountability. So that is Gallery Walk. That's the first one. The second of the higher prep discussion strategies is called philosophical chairs. And this actually has a lot of different names. I've seen it called values continuum, forced debate, a physical barometer. And I actually used this same strategy in an icebreaker and I called it this or that. And so philosophical chairs basically works this way. The teacher reads a statement. Students who agree with the statement go to one side of the room. Students who disagree go to the other side. They may stand, they may sit, but they have to physically move to the spot in the room that represents their opinion. And then students take turns talking about why they are where they are. And there are real formal ways of doing this, and there are much less formal ways. I think in a traditional philosophical chairs discussion, they may actually put one chair down to represent the agree side and one chair to represent the disagree side. And students will actually take turns sitting in those chairs talking to the other side about why they are where they are. And a lot of times what will happen is that when students hear the arguments of the other side, they will move. They will move over to the other side because they realize that they have changed their minds after they've heard an argument. I said that an alternate name for this is values continuum. Another way to set this up is to actually have more than two options. You could have, I've done this where you have a strongly agree side, then it goes to agree, neutral, disagree, and strongly disagree. And students sort of stand where along that continuum their opinion is. That way you can really see who has the strongest feelings about the topic and who is kind of in the middle. So that's philosophical chairs. We've done gallery walk and philosophical chairs. The next one is called a pinwheel discussion. And I found this on the teaching channel. It was actually invented by Sarah Brown Wessling, who was the National Teacher of the Year a couple of years ago. So here's how a pinwheel discussion works. You divide students into 4 groups. 3 of those groups represent different points of view on a topic, or they could represent different authors, or they can represent different characters in stories. And so, but the idea is that you've got 3 different groups, and then you have a 4th group. We're going to talk about that 4th group in a minute. So you get your 3 groups, and they get together, and they write some discussion questions that are sort of, that would address their own point of view. Then students sit in a pinwheel, and here's how the pinwheel works. 1 student from each group gets in the center, and they face each other in kind of like a square. And then all of their other group members sort of fan out behind them, where there's like 2 behind the first person, and then there's 3, and then there's 4. So it's like a triangle. So if you were looking at it from up above, it looks like a pinwheel. So this 4th group is also sitting there, and they are called the provocateurs. And their whole job is to write and give questions that push the thinking and push the conflict a little bit and really keep the conversation challenging and interesting and just keep it going. So the groups work together for a while to sort of formulate their questions, and then the pinwheel discussion begins. Only the 4 in the middle actually talk. Everybody else sort of listens, observes, takes notes, and then after a certain amount of time has passed, they rotate so that another person from the group actually gets into that center conversation. And they are only allowed to talk from that perspective that they have been assigned to. And so they have a conversation with each other based on some of these pre-written questions. And the provocateur's job is to sort of link everything together or to get them talking to each other. There are a lot of different variations on this. It can be sort of a nonfiction based conversation where they're talking from different perspectives. Maybe one person is representing the oil industry, and another group is representing an environmental group or something like that. But it's usually text-based, and actually, I shouldn't say it's usually text-based. That is how Sarah Brown Wessling has introduced it. But the structure of 4 different groups, one group meaning to just be a provocateur and the other 3 representing distinct points of view, that's the basic gist of what a pinwheel discussion is. So in some ways, it's kind of like philosophical chairs in that you have one speaker at a time representing different points of view. But the addition of the provocateur really kind of makes it a little bit more interesting. And also the fact that students don't choose their position in this one. They're assigned it, and they're having to debate sort of based on whatever perspective they have been given. So the 4th and last one of the high prep discussion strategies is Socratic seminar. And this is one that probably more teachers are familiar with than anything else in this list, really, or most of the other things. So Socratic seminar, it's also called Socratic circles. A lot for a correctly run Socratic seminar, it should be based on a text that students read prior to the seminar. They read a text or a group of texts, and they write some higher order questions based on that text, or the teacher will write those questions ahead of time. The students then sit in a circle, and an introductory open-ended question is read, and the students basically just have a conversation. It's supposed to be a real natural flowing conversation. They're not raising hands. There's no formal structure for taking turns. And they are encouraged to build off of one another's statements, to ask for textual evidence for things, and to be mindful of how much time they're taking. It's used in college classrooms and in literature classrooms. And so there is a link to a video for Socratic Seminar. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that one because I've linked in the article to 2 different resources that can sort of show you how it's done. When I did Socratic Seminar with middle school kids, it was pretty frustrating for me because I didn't do enough preparation ahead of time. I think I was under the impression that I was supposed to just kind of like let the kids take over and just, see what happened and keep myself out of it as much as possible, which is true. But I think there's some training that you can do with them. You can talk prior to the seminar about what kinds of questions can come up and what are some question stems that you can use and what happens when someone says something that you disagree with. And we didn't do a lot of pre-writing of questions. And so I really kind of lacked preparation for it. So definitely take advantage of some of the links to supportive materials that can teach you how to do it better. Okay, those are the high prep. Low prep discussion strategies. I have got 6 of them. Okay, first one is called affinity mapping. Never heard of this until a few days ago when I found it online, and I love it. This is a good brainstorming strategy, but it's discussion also. So this would be good for things where you're trying to get kids to generate lots of ideas about things. So you could ask them something like, what literary works should every person read? Or what were the impacts of the Great Depression? And what you do is have students generate responses by writing their ideas down on Post-it notes. They would have one idea per note or one response per note. And then they just stick them on a wall in no particular order. Once you've generated a lot of ideas, then have the students start clumping them together in groups that make sense and labeling those groups. And then talking about why are these ideas in these particular categories. And if you want to push it even further, then once the categories have been developed, you could challenge the students to create brand new categories with the exact same ideas. What's another way of grouping these from a completely different angle? So it's a way of taking brainstorming to a more structured level, basically. Another term for affinity mapping is affinity diagramming. So next is concentric circles, and another term that's used for this is speed dating. This is a good conversation strategy for even informal conversations where you're trying to get to know each other. I actually used concentric circles as one of my suggested icebreakers in another post. So here's how it works. 2 circles of kids, same number of kids in each circle. The inner circle faces the outer circle. You pose a question to the group and the students discuss their answer to the question with the kid facing them. And once they have had that conversation with that question for a few minutes, then you say rotate, and the outer circle moves just one person over. And now all of the students are paired with a new person. And you can either repeat the same question or you can ask a new question. And then they talk, and then you rotate again, and now you've got a new question. And so it's a way of getting lots and lots of kids to have one-on-one interactions, which is a safer, lower risk conversation than if they just have to talk in front of the whole class. Much more intimate, but they get a chance to talk to lots of different students as well. So another variation on this that I found out about was, well, first of all, you can do it in straight lines instead of a circle. You could just have 2 lines facing each other, and then one line just shifts over one, and the person who's left on the end just walks around to the beginning of the line, and you could do it that way. And another thing that I learned about is that some teachers actually use this for teaching content. Each student will be assigned a different piece of content that they have to teach another student. And so that conversation isn't just for discussion, but it is for really actually teaching each other something. So that's another use for that. Okay, so that's concentric circles. We've done affinity mapping and concentric circles. The next one, this is another one that I saw on the teaching channel from Sarah Brown Westling. She calls it conversations, and this is just a really basic structure. So you've got your kids in groups. Say you've got 4 groups of 6 kids, okay? And you pose a question and all the students discuss it in some way within their group. Then for the next question, just take 2 students from each group and have just those 2 students rotate to the next group. So what you've done is you've sort of shaken up the group a little bit. And the idea is that these students, when they go to the next group, they sort of carry with them the thinking that happened in the last group, and then they can share that with their next group. And then with the next question, you can choose 2 other students that haven't done any rotating yet, and then they can move to another group. They can move in the other direction maybe, so that every time you ask a question, you have some students who have been together for the last question, but then you have some new additions that can enrich the conversation. This is really good, especially if you get concerned about, I'm not sure exactly how to group my students. I've got these two who don't get along that well, or, I want to make sure there's a nice balance of this, and that. This way, you're sort of rotating the kids around enough so that everyone is getting an opportunity to sort of experience whatever ideas were generated in a different group. And it's not a perfect strategy. You're not necessarily trying to make sure that every single idea in every single group gets shared with every single group, but it's a way of really sort of stretching the thinking of everybody in the room. Next is fishbowl, which is similar to some of the others in that you have two students in the center of the room having a conversation and everyone else around is observing. Fishbowl is a little bit more for the study of discussion. So suppose you're teaching your students how to paraphrase another person's idea before they start with their own, how to listen, before you speak. So you can teach the skill to the whole class. You can have two students go into the center. Everybody sits around and observes them have this conversation, and they can either take notes on things that they're noticing that are happening, or they can grade them. In the video that I'm sharing for this strategy, the teacher actually talks about having a rubric, and the other students give them a grade or feedback on how they did on whatever the skill was that they were practicing. This could also be done in a similar way to philosophical chairs. You have two students discussing an issue and maybe everybody else sort of sits back and listens, and then they can jump in and take the place of one of the people. But I guess the idea is that you're talking about one conversation between two people only, and everybody else is participating by listening and observing more than actually talking. So, low prep, we've got affinity mapping, concentric circles, conversations, fishbowl. And now this one sounds like it could be very similar to fishbowl, but it's not. Hot seat. Hot seat is where one student gets up in front of the class and responds to questions from the rest of the class. In most cases, this person is taking on the persona of someone else. They're being a book character, or they are being an author or a historical figure, or in some cases it could even be something more abstract, like they're being an animal, or they're being a weather disturbance, or something like that. And then the other students ask them questions. Now, I'm calling this a low prep strategy, but this could also be very, very high prep. This could be after students have read a novel or a particular text. The other students could be required to really prepare their questions ahead of time. You could require that the person in the hot seat needs to back up their responses with some sort of textual evidence. So it really could be much more high level and rigorous, or it could be something that's just informal. You could have students trade out who gets to be in the hot seat. Maybe if somebody feels that one person isn't including all aspects of that character, they could be like, I think I can do a better job, and let them jump in. You could also have multiple hot seat discussions going on where you've got several groups where one person is in the hot seat and then a few people in that group are just asking them that question. That's a little bit more low risk. You could also do a panel discussion where in the hot seat, you don't have just one character, but maybe 3 or 4 students up there representing different characters or different authors. And they're all taking questions from the audience, kind of like Jerry Springer or something like that. But it's a good thing maybe a lot of kids don't even know what Jerry Springer is anymore. But it's sort of like a TV talk show. You have a panel of people responding to questions or having a fishbowl type discussion with one another, and then taking conversations. A lot of these discussion strategies can be combined with each other. So that's hot seat. And then the very last one in the low prep list is called a snowball discussion. I've also seen it referred to as a pyramid discussion. So here's the idea. You throw out a question, students discuss it with one partner. Once they have sort of thoroughly discussed it with a partner, then 2 pairs join each other for a group of 4, and then they talk again about the same topic. Then that group of 4 joins another group to form a group of 8, and you just keep making that group larger and larger until you have a whole class discussion. Where I read about this, the person describing the strategy actually said that the group should be trying to reach consensus every time they get larger and larger, which is a completely different goal than just kind of sharing ideas. So it could be done in one way or another. It could be just sharing ideas and learning more about each other, or learning more about, the different aspects of whatever you're talking about. Or they could be trying to reach consensus, which is harder to do and more interesting, but it's a completely different dynamic. Okay, so that's a snowball. So just a quick review of what we've talked about so far. We have got gallery walk, where students walk around the room visiting different stations. Philosophical chairs, that's students break up depending on where their opinion lies, and then they discuss where they're standing and why. Pinwheel discussion, this is the 3 different groups representing different points of view, plus a provocateur group, and one representative from each group takes turns discussing things in kind of a central location. Socratic seminar, that's the big circle. And one thing I forgot to mention about this big circle is that if you've got a large class for Socratic seminar, a lot of teachers will decide to have just an inner circle of like 8 or 10 kids, and then an outer circle that's observing and taking notes. And sometimes they'll switch and let the outer circle come in and continue the conversation, but that's Socratic seminar. And then we had our low prep discussion strategies, the affinity mapping, which is all the post-it notes, and then you kind of start to move the post-it notes around until they're in categories. Concentric circle, that's an inner circle and an outer circle, and they answer a question with their partner and then rotate and talk to a new person, rotate, talk to a new person. Conversations, this is just basic small group discussion, but you rotate about 2 people every question so that you're mixing the groups up and getting fresh perspectives. Fishbowl, that's 2 people in the center while everybody else observes. Hot seat, that's 1 person in the front of the room taking questions from the whole class, or it could be a panel of people. Snowball, that's where you're starting with 2, adding 2 together with 4, and then adding that with 8, and then you grow and grow until you've got the whole class talking. Okay, the last batch is what I'm just calling ongoing discussion strategies. These are sort of plug-in things. These are not, they're not structures by themselves, but they're things that you can use with any other type of instructional strategy or incorporate them into the other discussion strategies. You'll see what I mean when I start to explain them. So the first one is called asynchronous voice. It sounds way fancier than it is. Asynchronous just means that the discussion is not happening all at one time. And this is something that requires technology. There is an app that I absolutely love, and it is called Voxer, and it really has changed. It's changed a lot for me. It's changed my relationships with people that I really didn't even know before. This is how Voxer works. It's like voicemail, but it's easier. You open the app and you have conversations that are right there. You just press a play button and you can listen to one after the other. So for example, I am in a Voxer group with 3 other friends of mine, and we talk about a lot of different things. And so I will open up the app and I will see that all 3 of them have said different types of things throughout, the last couple of hours. One woman may have said like 3 or 4 things all at once. Another person may have contributed just, a minute or so. And so what I can do is I press play on the top conversation and listen to it, and then all of the others play one after the other. It's kind of like a podcast, actually. You can listen to it, and then anytime I want to contribute, I just press the button, say what I want to say right into the phone, press the button again, and my contribution is done. And the nice thing about this is that we talk whenever it's convenient for us. It's not like getting on Skype together where everybody has to be there at the same time. The conversation just goes on and on and on. It's actually been going on for almost a year now. And sometimes it sort of dies down. Other times it picks up and gets, a lot of people have a lot to say. We're talking about a particular issue. So I'll just pick it up. I'll press a button and I'll say, hey, I was wondering what you guys think about this. And then sometimes no one will respond for a few hours, but then other times they happen to be right by their phone and they'll tell me right away. The reason this is good for students is that if you get students together on a Voxer group, they could have discussions where they don't have to be all together at school. And this is probably especially best for high school kids. But younger kids are getting smartphones also. And they don't even necessarily have to do it on smartphones. It could be done on an iPad. It's not yet web-based on computers yet, but any type of a device that's like a smart device. So you could say to them, tonight I want you to answer these 2 discussion questions in your group. And all of the kids could be on different Voxer groups together. And they could do this discussion anytime between the time they come home from school until they go to bed. They could even do it in the morning before school the next day, if that's how their schedule works out. And if you make yourself part of the group, then you can listen and participate in each one. If this sounds like something that you're interested in or curious about, I would definitely suggest that you go to the article associated with this, which, by the way, the title of the article, if you just wanted to Google it, it's just called The Big List of Class Discussion Strategies. But another way of getting to it is to just go to cultofpedagogy.com/pod and click on episode 28, and it'll take you right here. So using Voxer, right now Voxer is the tool that I am aware of that does asynchronous voice conversations. And it's sort of like a message board that you would go online and participate in, but it's voice. And there is something so special and intimate and so much more immediate about hearing somebody's voice. And again, if you're a podcast listener, you can totally appreciate this as opposed to seeing it in writing. So having asynchronous voice conversations is another way of having some of these other types of conversations outside of class time or even inside of class time, as long as your room has got quiet spaces where students can use these tools. Another one that is technology based, and the others after this are not, but is called a back-channel discussion. Back-channel discussion is a discussion that is happening at the same time as something else. So imagine that you are showing your students a 15-minute video on something, and you would like them to talk about the video. With a back-channel discussion, they can be discussing it by typing out questions and comments as the video is going. They can use a tool called Today's Meet. Today's Meet is one of a few other back-channel discussions. Today's Meet's just like those old instant message chat rooms. It's just a blank screen where people can type up questions and it just kind of scrolls as people add things. They can do this again from smartphones, devices. They can do it from laptops. You just give everybody this free URL. It takes them to this private room where they can ask these questions. And you can even project the conversation up on a screen where everybody can see what's being asked. But if they're in the discussion on their tablet or whatever, they can also see it going on. So this is a way for kids who are not very outgoing to participate. It's also a way, suppose something is going on in the film and a student really wants to mention something, they're afraid that they're going to forget it later or whatever, they can type up the question or the comment during the film and somebody else could respond to it or whatever. So a lot more teachers are using back channel discussions. In the article associated with this podcast, I actually linked to a really thoughtful article by Beth Holland, who writes for Edutopia, where she talks about some of the really good uses for back channel discussions in the classroom. It's definitely worth taking a look at. Okay, 3 more of these sort of ongoing types of things, and these all 3 are not technology based. One of them is called talk moves. Another term for this is accountable talk. These are sentence stems, basically, that you can provide to students that help them in a discussion, that teach them how to phrase certain things, how to summarize another person's argument before you present your view, or how to ask a clarifying question, how to just express disagreement or agreement with another person's point of view. And so even though this seems like it may be most useful for younger students, I've found that high school and college students still need some help learning how to structure the way that they say things. So you can plug talk moves into any of these other conversational or discussion strategies and just provide students with, help in terms of how do you say this and how do you say that. So those are called talk moves. And there's lots and lots of different ways of doing it, but it's more of a concept to keep in mind when you're having class discussions. A second to last one is called Teach OK. And Teach OK comes from a movement called whole brain teaching, which was created by a guy named Chris Biffle. And if you know it well, probably. And if you've never heard of it, then probably somebody you know has used it. It's very popular in elementary schools, but I have actually used it with college students. And I found that most of them kind of liked it because it was a nice change of pace. So whole brain teaching is a whole gamut of strategies, but one of the sort of original foundational strategies that is used a lot in whole brain teaching is this thing called Teach OK. And it works like this. I teach my class just a couple of things really quickly because in whole brain teaching, they don't want you to ever teach for long, long periods of time. They want the kids to be active. And then I say to all of them, teach. And then they say back to me, okay. And then they turn to a partner and they reteach the concept that I just taught them. And they're supposed to use gestures and they're supposed to be really animated when they do this. And that's it. That's teach okay. But you do it sort of over and over and over again during a lesson. So it's more of an instructional strategy. It is discussion. You're getting students to talk about the content, but they're reteaching it to each other. Now, you could also use Teach OK, to have them to sort of have conversations about their opinions. But Teach OK is really more designed for helping students to remember the content better because they're putting it into their own words and they're using novelty of talking with another person about it. And so that's Teach OK. That can be plugged into any lesson. Yeah, any lesson where you're sort of trying to deliver content to them. You want to stop occasionally, have them do a Teach OK, and then resume the lesson again. And finally, an oldie but a goodie is Think, Pair, Share, which I wrote a whole other post about what's so great about Think, Pair, Share. And this is another one that probably a lot of teachers know. This is a good old standby. If you're not familiar with it, it's just really simple. And this is a lot like Teach OK, really. You can be talking about something in class, doing something, and you stop, have students do a Think, Pair, Share, where they sort of process their own response to a question, turn to a partner, discuss their ideas with them, and then as a teacher, you can call on individual pairs to share with the rest of the class what they talked about. One thing that you can add into this that makes it really even more robust, I think, is to have students write their response first before they turn to a partner. Because some students will be influenced by the other person that they talk to and be like, yeah, that's exactly what I think. It's pretty much the same way. And if you give them a little bit of time to process their thinking first, I think it lends itself to a richer conversation and to students owning their opinions a little bit more before they just agree with the other person that they're with. It's also just good for students who process things a little bit more slowly to give them that time to think through how they want to say something or what they think about something. So that is Think, Pair, Share. And so the variation on that would be a Think, Write, Pair, Share. So let me just review these one more time since we are listening and you can't exactly scroll through. We have got a gallery walk, philosophical chairs, pinwheel discussion, Socratic seminar, affinity mapping, concentric circles, converse stations, fishbowl, hot seat, snowball discussion, and then these other sort of plug-in ones that you can add on to other conversations. Asynchronous voice discussions on something like Voxer, back channel discussions, using talk moves to augment any discussion to teach students how to actually phrase things in a conversation. Teach OK, and Think, Pair, Share. I tried really hard to find as many good things as I could, but I'm sure I missed things. So if you know of another discussion format that you think should be added to this list, come on over to this post and let me know in the comments. This, again, it is called the Big List of Class Discussion Strategies. Or if you just go to cultofpedagogy.com/pod and click on episode 28, you will find it there too. I hope you can take one of these strategies and use it in your classroom tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening and have a fantastic day. This podcast is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. To learn more, visit edupodcastnetwork.com.